my name's Tiffany. This is my husband, Josh High. I actually was originally from a pretty small town in Northwest Ohio. Went to the University of Toledo, got my master's at Tiffany University. And I spent about 10 or 15 years in corporate space, and I traveled all over the country in my corporate career. I was the head of North American oil trading for a big oil company. So I was literally on a plane 24/7. And then from there, well, I won't take up the mic. You can tell a bit about you. And then we'll tell the story.
Fair. So, I graduated from the University of Toledo as well. I got my degree in civil engineering, but I didn't go into engineering. I went into project management and worked in the corporate world for about 5 years. And really when we got into real estate, I thought that I could help because I had experience in construction. Here soon, we'll talk a little bit more about our journey in real estate, but we learned real fast that it's not a construction business. It's a sales and marketing business. And where I thought I'd be able to add value, I actually don't add value to today. So very interesting story that we'll get into here in a second. So
yeah. So him and I both went to the University of Toledo. I'm 7 years older than him. So I consider myself a Puma, not a Cougar, because I'm not 40 yet. But anyways, long story short, I had went from being an oil trader. I got a phone call from my parents that my little brother, I'm the oldest of a big family, got diagnosed with cancer, and he was in high school. And long story short, I definitely overreacted in the moment, but I left my job on the spot. It all worked out for a reason. God does things, for a reason. But on my drive home the next day, I literally packed up my Ford Focus with a pillow, a blanket, and a couple pieces of clothes and said, I'll figure it out. I left everything behind. And on my drive home that day, an executive at Owens Corning, which is headquartered near my parents' house, had heard about me leaving my job somehow and said, hey, look, we're looking for someone with trading experience. We just heard that you left your job to be with your family. Would you be interested in taking a job with us since we're headquartered by you guys? And, that's why I always say, like, God has a reason for everything. But I decided to go, and then literally the next day interviewed, took the role. And then little did I realize that role was also traveling by a plane Monday through Friday. And I oversaw 16 asphalt plants. And the whole purpose of me moving home was to be there for my brothers and sisters. And so we're about 5 months into this journey now. And I actually really loved my career. Like, I didn't want to leave it. So that was a really hard for me. But anyways, my brother didn't leave the hospital for over a year. And my parents owned a few different companies. And we were 5 months into this journey of his cancer. And my parents were sitting in the corner of the room. And I remember looking at them thinking, how have you not left the hospital in 5 months? Like, how is that possible when you own, I think at the time, 3 or 5 companies? And they looked at me and they said, well, our team is stepping it up. Like, our people are allowing us to be present so that we can be there in this moment. And I think that really touched me. And it happened to be Easter week. And I just felt like God was saying something to me. So I, again, probably overreacted a little bit, but I got up from the hospital, went in and quit my job that day. And I just said, you know what? I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I was going to do real estate. I didn't even know really what flipping houses or anything was. And so I tried being a bartender. That lasted 4 hours. I tried being a nanny. That lasted less than 2 days. And then somebody that I was private lending for at the time I said, hey, can I come out and see your flip? I got no job now. I got nothing to do. Can you walk me through it? So I got to see the before and afters, and I was like, wow, you're making $80,000 on this flip. Like, no disrespect, but if you can do this, I can do this too. And so I went home, maxed it out my credit card, joined an educational program, did about 40 flips our first year. And then I learned what wholesaling was, did about 165 wholesales. Now we do 300 plus transactions a year since then. So That's kind of a little bit of the origin story of how things got started.
Wow, that's incredible. Definitely a very powerful story, and definitely appreciate you sharing that. And tell us a little bit more about how did you guys meet? How did you guys come about? And maybe a little bit further as far as being in business together. Maybe share a little bit of an insight into that.
Yeah. So you want to tell a story? You want me to tell a story? Because I feel like we have different stories.
Be careful there.
I'll tell the real story. So when Tiff made that decision, her brother was diagnosed with cancer, moved up to Toledo, got that call, started with that company. her first night out, we ended up running into each other at a bar, and I'll never forget this. We locked eyes across the room, and then we went and walked towards each other, and all I did was smile at her as she walked by. For whatever reason, I don't struggle with talking to girls, especially not at this time.
I learned that soon after.
And for whatever reason, I couldn't say anything. I don't know why I didn't. I just froze up. And so I spent the rest of the night looking for her. Luckily, ran into her again, and then we hit it off. And I just stayed in touch, for the next few months. So one thing I will say is right out the gate, Tiff looks at me and she didn't realize how young I was. The bald head, I think, fooled her. But she saw my friends and she's like, "Man, you are really young. How old are you?" And then she realized I was still in school. She was climbing the corporate ladder. And I think the reason why I ever even had a chance, I didn't think I had a chance, but I think the reason why I was able to win her over was because of my follow-up game.
Yeah, he followed with me like every Wednesday at the same time, asking me the same damn question for 3 months. And then finally one day I was like, "You're so freaking annoying that I will meet you just so you stop texting me."
No, I think you enjoyed it. But anyways.
So we met and it's been history ever since.
Yeah.
But for the first year, I have to admit, I was a little crazy. I made him lie about his age to my friends for like a year.
So now as we fast forward into starting the company, I'll never forget the day she called me and she said, "Hey, I just quit." And I'll never forget thinking to myself, "You just what? What are you going to do?" But I always knew, way deep down that if there was anyone that was going to figure it out, it was going to be her. And, I think one thing that probably helped in that moment was that I was super supportive of whatever it is that you wanted to do, no matter if it was bartending, nannying, or starting your own business. And, luckily we decided to jump into real estate. And now going back to where, we thought that it was a construction business flipping houses, and it's definitely not. It's a sales and marketing business. And, Tiff is just a natural at marketing.
Man, you're sucking up today.
Well, no, it's the truth though. Like your natural strength was always marketing, and we were generating opportunities, and we learned real fast. It took us 6 months to get our first deal. But like Tiff was really good at getting the phone ringing. It's just, we both were scared to talk to sellers at the time. So we knew that we had to develop this skill set in talking to sellers, sales essentially. So, we started to dive in and study and read and study and learned. And finally we were able to get our first deal 6 months in. And, it's crazy what happened after that, because, the next 12 months after we got our first deal, we ended up doing 40 deals, and that led to the next 12 months being 165 transactions or wholesales. And it just skyrocketed ever since.
Yeah. About a year into it, because a lot of people ask us, like, how do you guys stay married and run the business together? And, the first year, I mean, I always tell everyone, like, it was hard the first year because, I never ran a company. I had a lot of things, like a lot of mistakes got made, because even though we spent a ton of money on education, we also got a lot of bad advice from some of the programs we were in. And so when we started scaling up, we had a couple mentors that were like, just hire, and make all these requirements for salespeople that are very unrealistic. And so we did all that. We just listened. We definitely took advantage of what was told to us. We did it. And then one day I woke up and I hated what I built, like hated it with a passion. I put some of the wrong people in the wrong seats. I didn't have the right systems. And then I just woke up on a Sunday and I was like, this is the most miserable thing I have ever built. And how did I build it to be a way that I hate my own office? And I lost my shit one day on a Sunday, and I was very stressed. I was having a lot of anxiety, and we were making money. That wasn't the thing. It was more about like, I don't have people in my office that align with my core values and like how we want to operate. And it's really a result of, just not knowing what I didn't know. Like, I didn't really have the hand holding experience of becoming the leader that I needed to become to have that type of operation. And so I called my mentor on a Sunday, bawling my eyes out, and he convinced me to go in on a Monday and let go of 3/4 of my staff and rebuild the thing from the ground up. And that was probably the hardest day I've ever been through in my life. I ended up in a hospital for a week about it because I felt very responsible for people's lives. And I didn't know if I was going to keep going after that, but my father and some other people really encouraged me to keep going, because they're like, "Hey, like, why would you not keep going? You've already made every mistake in the book. Now you know what not to do." And so we did. And this time We're very fortunate. We have a family friend that built multiple companies multi-million-dollar companies off building phone sales floors.
Mhm.
So they retired. We paid them to come into our office, physically sit in our office and handhold us to rebuilding this. And now it's what you see today. We have a very corporate like infrastructure, from our management framework, how we performance manage all of our processes, our onboardings, our trainings are very, very corporate like, very, very systemized. And we're just a different company today. And also our entire recruiting and interview process is totally different and revamped. And now I will say, after, coming out of that 4 years ago, I feel like today we have probably one of the best cultures in the industry, hands
Mhm.
down. Like, if you came into my office, it's a very tight knit environment, high energy. Like, I wouldn't go a day without going to my office now. And so I'm
Mhm.
really glad that I took the time to rebuild it, because I don't think we'd be here if we didn't take that chance.
It's kind of crazy. Tiff brought this up earlier that we're both big believers that everything happens for a reason. If we didn't experience that office that we created, that we
Mhm.
ultimately hated, if we didn't create that, we wouldn't have learned the lessons on the back end of that, and therefore
Right.
we wouldn't have what we have today. And for whatever reason in our industry, wholesaling, fixing and flipping, everyone treats this like a side hustle. It's almost like the
Mhm.
Wild Wild West. There's no corporate structure. There's no structure around recruiting the right people, onboarding, training them, managing them. They just kind of say, here's a script and go ahead and run with this. Right. And it's in every department in these organizations. So we were able to take the corporate experience that we both had, and
Mhm.
we were able to put that type of structure into our organization. And it's amazing what's happened ever since we did that.
Yeah, that's super interesting and resonates on so many levels, because just a little bit of about my background. Very similarly, I've gone through the corporate structure. I've got all the education in the world, multiple degrees, did the Harvard thing, all of that, worked at Fortune 500, and climbed through the top of the ranks in technologists by trade, by industry, by training, all that. So software engineering, all of that stuff has been always interesting to me. But going through that corporate life and just building the teams and how to structure the organizations, it's always kind of just was this two-sided kind of approach to that as well, because I always knew that at the end of the day I'm just going to get very bored. It's not something that I can do day to day. And just like you, Tiffany, were saying, I've had the plan all along to completely move away from all of that and build something of my own, which is currently what I'm doing for the past several years. But having that mentality and approach of really building for long term, and not treating that as just a Mickey Mouse little startup, but essentially building out that the company is going to grow, the company is going to go through the different phases, and you're going to need to hire. It's always, like you said, they don't teach you in those boot camps or those online classes that you say. And sometimes I make on some of my reels about the posts that I'm seeing, where everything is very surfacey. So that resonates on so many levels, which leads me to a further question I have for you guys. When it comes to that very complicated space of hiring, it's sounds like we both have done that. We've built the teams on the corporate side, and now it's a little bit different when you hire for your own team, for your own company. um, as far as just how you structure the interview process, what are the types of questions that you ask, and more importantly, tell us a little bit more about what do you look for in the responses, and how do you know that this particular person may potentially be a great fit for the culture that you're trying to foster and develop within your organization.
You want to talk about the things we look for out of someone, and then I'll go on the interview process.
For sure. So the three things that we look for, and this all comes from having a clearly defined, highly effective onboarding process. If we don't have an onboarding process, it's going to be very difficult to go find someone and plug them into the system and put them in a position to be successful. So that's first and foremost. Now that we have this clearly defined and highly effective onboarding process, I just need to go find someone who's first and foremost a core value fit. So we have to share and align with core values. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Secondly, you have to be coachable. If you're not coachable, it doesn't matter what I teach you. You're not going to take it and run with it and actually implement it. So again, that's not going to be a good fit either. And then lastly, the third thing that we look for is you have to be growth oriented. I want someone who's going to step into the office every day and be laser focused on being the best version of themselves, because that's what it's going to take to be the best sales rep, the best ops coordinator, the best ops manager, the best, no matter what the role is, you have to be laser focused on being the best version of you.
Yeah, I would say too, I feel like a lot of organizations, especially from my past corporate life, people try their best to recruit A players. A players sometimes come at a cost. And I feel like when we talk about sales specifically, if you have stellar onboarding, training, and performance management, you can take anyone and turn them into a salesperson as long as they fit those 3 aspects. So if we look at some of the top people in my company from a sales perspective, they came from being a contractor, an eyeglass shop, cleaners. Like they had nothing to do with sales before the role. And now they're doing multiple 6 figures. And so I think that's a result of the onboarding, training, management, leadership of the company. So in the recruiting process, the way in which we find people, we have different ways, but one of the most successful ways we've had is through our referral program. So what we do is, just to give you an idea, whether you're an employee, a friend of ours, or anyone that follows us on social media, we're always putting out our roles and saying, if you find someone and refer them to the company and we hire them, you get a $5,000 recruiting fee. And we pay it after the person performs. So let's just say it's a salesperson, for example. We pay $1,000 after day 30 or 1 through 30 on the phone. So we typically have 2 weeks of onboarding. They have a piece of paper that they sign on their 30, 60, 90-day expectations. And if they hit that 30-day expectation, then the person who referred them gets the first $1,000. If they don't hit it, that person's not getting paid. Mm-hmm. So the only way that they'll want to refer people is if they know they're going to perform then. And then after 90 days on the phone, if they hit our 90-day expectation, we give the remainder of the 4. If it's some other type of role in the company, they have to perform at expectation for 90 days or you don't get paid the $5,000. And I would say 70% or 75% of our office now comes from this program, which is definitely cheaper than hiring a recruiting firm. So when I also use recruiting firms. So, anyone watching this, I'm sure knows that recruiting firms either charge you a commission on the salary or a flat fee, but let's just say it's 10 to 15 grand on average for your, $50,000 to $80,000 employee. And, so we do that. And then we also do Indeed internally, and we have someone in-house, but ultimately, we have outsourced third-party HR person. It can even be a friend of yours, whatever you want. They weed through all of the phone interviews. We don't do any of that in-house anymore. So we have an 8-question script. They go through it. And a lot of times on the phone interview, we do a little bit of core value questions, but it's here's the hours, here's the physical aspect of the job, here's the benefits, here's the expected pay. Is this something you're even interested in? Because I don't even want them to get in front of my office and waste our time if not. So we have an external HR person doing that for us. And then they come in and they set up Zoom interviews for 15 or 30 minutes, depending on the role. And they stack. It used to be us doing them. Now our leadership team does it, but they stack up interviews. And in that, we're asking again, for example, the sales role. All of our sales are phone sales. So we want to reiterate, hey, man, are you sure you're cool with phone sales? You're going to be sitting at a desk making hundreds of dials, and we just don't want you to come in here and you're used to doing belly to belly, handshaking sales. So we just want to be clear so that we don't waste anyone's time. We talk about the hours again, the benefits, and then we spend the rest of the time talking about core values. Then if we feel like they're worth bringing into the office, we bring in on a third interview. That's where we ask your typical change management questions and a few different situational type questions. And one question I focus on personally a lot outside of the core value exercises is, hey, I tell them the origin story of the company. And I talk about how we've doubled or tripled in revenue year over year for 6 years in a row. So, and that ain't stopping. And one of our core values is growth. And with growth comes pain. And when I say pain, I always give this example. I had hired someone a few years ago that didn't like change in general. They had panic attacks over it. And I had went from a click to call dial system to a power dialer within my CRM, because now this person who could make 70 dials before makes 500, which obviously influences her paycheck, the company productivity, everything. And the person had a panic attack and had to leave work. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell the story because I'm hey, we have a whole development staff behind the scenes that over the next few years, you're going to see us constantly changing software, systems, CRMs, buttons, and you have to be okay with change. So tell me a story of where you thrive through change, because I need to make sure that they feel comfortable with that. And then the last half of the interview, we do a core value exercise that's been a game changer for us, where we get to really know them deeper, and we want to see, do they align with us or not? And then from there, if we feel like, hey, they align, we surprise them with a 30-minute working interview. And so we hand them a script. If it's a salesperson, we role play it and we throw them on the phone. We have a few things we're looking for. Like, one is, how do you take coaching and feedback? So our goal is that we get you on the phone with 3 people minimum. And then even if you did a great job, we're still going to give you feedback to implement, to see, how did you implement it? Did you listen? Were you receptive? And then we also want to know, like, were you shaking? Are you nervous? Are you communicating with our team very well? Because they all sit together on a floor. And then how are they maneuvering the computer? Are they able to type, look at 2 different screens, move fast? Because we've been guilty of hiring people in the past that we didn't do that. And then we're like, shit, they type like 1 word an hour. And so because of the working interview, it's really helped us weed out, like, there's some people in the past we probably would have never hired if we did the working interview. If it's an operational type role, we typically do like a 2 to 3 hour working interview where we show them how to do something. Then we ask them to do it. And then we ask them to show it, like, explain back why we do that process. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I need to see, do they retain it, understand it? Can I tell if they enjoy the work? And so once we get past that and we're like, yeah, we want to hire this person more than likely, we then have a 4th interview where they either go to breakfast, lunch, or happy hour with my team, or the team that they would be working with. Because at the end of the day, I want you to want to work with us just as much as we want to work with you. And so this is like going on a date now to say, do you like us? And do we like you? Because we're not a massive company. So it takes one, uncomfortable relationship in the office to impact the culture. And so we just really go above and beyond to really make sure that the person's the right fit, that we're both aligned. We have the same mission and vision together. And, we've had people be like, well, don't you think people aren't going to go through that long process? And it's like, well, then they're not a fit for us. It is what it is. Like, if I miss out on talent because of it, I don't really care.
I'll be honest with you. We haven't had a whole lot of people.
Yeah, we haven't had that, but we definitely get asked that question.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. And one thing that really stands out from what both of you guys are talking about is a very structured approach to selection, to criteria, to interview process, and even what happens after the interview, which is, resonates on so many levels with my company. Essentially, we're a venture capital firm where we have 2 distinct swim lanes. We invest into real estate and we invest into technology companies. And for us, structure and the process and the checklist of most standard operating procedures and all of those KPIs is at the core of all of that. Because the moment we start going sideways and, make everything subjective and objective, we're not going to be able to bring on the people that will thrive in that particular environment, which makes a lot of sense. And one advice that recently I had a conversation on the podcast as well with the CTO of L'Oreal, Manish Sinha. And one thing that he mentioned to me as part of the hiring process that really helps him to really, weed out those that are not going to be necessarily a fit is to also engage the potential hires into some type of a contract-based or project-based activity, where before you actually hire them on as a full-time employee, because then it becomes even a costlier problem to fix, is give them an assignment, give them a project, and see how they operate, see how you both operate from that capacity. And I thought that was very simple, very rudimentary, but oftentimes overlooked activity that to this day, I actually do a lot of that. If we're hiring for marketing or a financial analyst, we usually like to give some type of a small task and see how they perform and also how they interact with each other, which is similar to what you were talking about, Tiffany, getting them engaged into some type of happy hour activity or some other team event. So that makes a lot of sense. You've mentioned both change management, you mentioned both growth, which is at the core, seems like the DNA of your organization, very similar to mine as well. And it's uncomfortable, it's needed, but at the same time, that's how we pivot, that's how we experiment, that's how we grow. And not everybody is okay with that. Talk to the concept of just the overall building that culture of innovation. How do you guys continuously innovate without losing the focus? What's at the core of the organization? How do you build that culture of innovation? You've talked about the right process for selecting those types that will fit right in, but anything that you can share internally that go on within your organization that you guys do day to day that help you, innovate yourselves, innovate your processes, or anything that you guys do. Because I would imagine you have to pivot a lot of times. Being in real estate, we all understand how cyclical that is. One day, flips and wholesale, everything is going great, and then things change. You have to pivot and adapt to that. Maybe spend a couple of minutes talking from that perspective to us.
I think about the culture building.
Yeah, I think there's two components here. When you talk about pivoting and adjusting and things of that nature, that's more from knowing and understanding the conversions and the key metrics that we're tracking, right? And then based on the story told, making educated decisions,
right,
to pivot and go in another direction. But I think there's something before that, which is the culture, which is what you brought up as well. So as far as building culture, this is exactly what we teach. This is what we've done in our organization, and it all starts with a foundation. And for us, our foundation is winning is a habit. And it all started for me. I actually played football at the University of Toledo. I played for Matt Campbell, who's now Iowa State. He played in a Big 12 championship. Honestly, he's one of the most probably sought after coaches in all of the Division I college football. And he used to come in all the time and talk to us in our team meetings saying, hey guys, we don't just show up on Saturdays and win football games. That's just not how it works, right? He said, instead, we have to have winning habits in all areas of our life, because if we're winning off the field with the decisions we're making on the weekends, we're winning in the classroom, sitting in the first two rows, getting our assignments done, we're winning in the weight room, not skipping any reps, not skipping any workouts, we're winning in the film room, on the practice field. Now, all of a sudden, when we show up on Saturdays, we've got a chance to win the game. And he would always talk about this concept of failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And that stuck with me. And I saw a lot of success, not just as a student athlete taking on those concepts, but even in my professional career as well, whether it's as an entrepreneur or even in the corporate realm, when I was consistently working out, when I was consistently focused on my personal development, when I was focused on eating right and focused on these winning habits, naturally, when I showed up to work, again, whether it was my business or in my career, I was winning. I was performing. I did very well. So this was something that we rolled out to in our organization a few years ago. And I'll never forget when we first rolled it out, man, it stuck. And it was amazing to see the buy-in when people saw, we started off with, we got everyone, I don't know if you remember this, but we got everyone gym memberships. And we would preach this day in and day out. And then what spun off of that? So you have this theme, right? Which is something that's a core belief to you. And then off of this theme, you have standards. So some of the standards that we have are things like being laser focused on being 1% better every day. This is actually something from the book, Good to Great. In the book, Good to Great, it says that if you get 1% better every day in just 365 days, now you're going to be 37x from when you started. So imagine that compound effect in 2 years, 5 years, or even 10 years. Another standard that we have is 11 out of 10 excellence, right? 9 out of 10 is not good enough. 10 out of 10 is not good enough. We have to consistently be striving to be the absolute best, striving for 11 out of 10 excellence. Just some themes, some standards like that spin off of the theme. And we talk about this every day in our huddles. We talk about this every week. We have what we call our Monday mindset, and we're constantly planting seeds on our culture, the standards that we live by and what we stand for. Now, what comes after that is the other part of your question, which is making adjustments, pivoting. And I'll let Tiff talk about some of the metrics and how we're reviewing the structure behind the metrics reviews and how we're pivoting and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think that it all starts in the interview process. And we've learned this even through the market shift in Q4 of 2022. Because it doesn't matter how good you are at real estate, everyone got impacted in Q4. And what we even seen in our own staff is it's all about the way in which you communicate to your team. So from the day that they start, right, on day one of onboarding, the first half of the first day is nothing but HR paperwork, sales compensations, all these things. And then it's all about our core values, our code of honor, and our standard. And from there, it's like, oh, by the way, let me walk you through some history of real estate. There's this graph, right? It goes like this. And right now we're going through this. We're going downward in the market. And ultimately, there's always going to be these market shifts. And we've been around for 6+ years now, and we're not going anywhere. So we need you to know going into this that there's a conversion cycle, not just by marketing campaign. So I explain to them and educate them along with my student base of, I think that I'm going to probably go off topic with this a little bit for a second, but if say you're one of my students and you come to me and you double down on a marketing channel and you freak the hell out 30 days later, because you're like, I don't know why this isn't performing and I'm not getting this ROI. And it's like, well, let's look at industry standard data. Industry standard data says that on cold calling, for example, you get a lead. In my company, it takes 167 days just to go into contract. And then it takes 42 days to wholesale it and a little under 3 months to rehab it. So now this channel has a 9+ month conversion cycle. Then the market impacts it. The 9 just turned into 12. And so when you get good at explaining the why behind the numbers and what's happening, it helps relieve people within the workplace of like, okay, that makes sense. And then it's like, now as the leader of the company, now you understand what's happening and why. And now we're going to get to work on how we quickly adapt. And in Q4, a lot of the iBuyers, the big boys, they all backed out. They all sat on the sidelines. We didn't. We doubled down. And I said, those guys, they don't know how to adapt. They don't know how to get their entire staff and organization to adapt today's environment. And we do. So we're going to go take advantage while other people are sitting on the sideline to double down. And now we're getting double the numbers months later because of what we did during that time period, because it takes time to see the fruit of what we did. And I just like, even when you think about COVID was also one of those like fearful events in society where everyone else, they go home, they come back to work and they're freaking out about their job or whatever. And it's like, guys, that's the one thing we're good at. We know how to adapt. We know how to pivot. And here's what's happening so we understand why. Now let's look at what's happening and how do we pivot around it. And we doubled down during COVID and we made an extra like $2 or $3 million that year because of it. And I think ultimately the more you empower people, and there's a little bit of pain in this piece, but if someone comes into the company and isn't a good problem solver, it is my mission to make you a problem solver. And in order to do that, I have to put you in uncomfortable situations because you're not going to know the answer to everything. And I'm not going to give you the answer to everything. The way I'm going to get you here is I already know the answers. I'm going to go guide you and let you figure it out because I need you to build the skill set of problem solving. And when you all in the room become the best problem solvers around, that takes us and gives us a massive competitive advantage over the guy next to us.
Now, I want to point this out because I think a lot of people who might be listening to this or watching this, they might oversee what Tiff was just talking about there. That is true leadership. So when you think about what is leadership, leadership is growing people. And what Tiff is talking about doing is creating an environment that is conducive for growth and challenging people, putting them in positions to where Tiff, we have the answers. We can give you the answers, but it's guiding you through this process to teach you a skill set to allow you to level up, to allow you to grow. That is the definition of leadership.
I like that a lot. As actually, Josh, you beat me to that, as I wanted to point out the whole aspect of the leadership, because I actually just spent exactly on that same topic talking to my 9-year-old. He's my oldest, and I'm coaching all of my kids' sports, and we talk a lot about leadership, and it's a very similar concept in the sense that it's all about, the leadership is all about, being able to put others in a position to succeed. And how do you go about that? And essentially, Tiffany, you talked about some of the hard times and times of change where you have to be very vulnerable and also at the same time be very transparent in terms of, here's the situation we're in and here's some of the things that we're going to execute in order to be able to adapt to succeed in that particular environment. So that's very interesting, which leads me to a further point of the point of conflict. And especially in your guys' situation where you're a married couple and you both are running the same business, conflict is unavoidable. Conflict is omnipresent in every aspect of all of our lives. And at the same time, I'm curious, how do you go about that, just the overall approach towards conflict? How do you resolve that? What are some of the things that go on behind the scenes in terms of when you're in the moment? Where for me, it's an ongoing learning journey where if I find myself in a situation where I feel like my emotions are rising or whatever the case is, trying to put myself out of that context and maybe spend a little bit of time to think and process that before reacting. And number one, looking at the intent. What is the other party's intent when you go, just overall from the conflict standpoint? Can you guys talk a little bit further about that? I'm curious, especially the dynamics of husband and a wife being I don't know if you guys are both CEOs or co-CEOs. Maybe share a little bit more from that perspective.
So one thing I'm going to jump out and say that you brought up, which I think is critical, especially for marriages that are partners in businesses. You talked about intent. So it's very easy at times for, if there's a heated conversation, it's very easy to get defensive and then lash back out, right? But the key thing that we've really built our relationship and our relationship foundation on has been the fact that we both know and understand that we both want what's best for each other and what's best for the organization. So whenever there is any kind of feedback, and it could be taken as maybe offensive, like we don't get defensive because we know that it comes from a good heart, right? The intent is to be the best. And when you know that's the intent, now all of a sudden you can take that feedback and then we can let it work for us versus it getting between us. So that's one thing that you brought up that has been instrumental for us in our relationship, whether it's our marriage or in business. But Tiff, you want to talk a little bit about our level 10s and kind of the structure?
So we have a level 10 between him and I, and we have an agreement that is the place where we get to argue, like if we want to. So in that level 10, it's all about accountability. And like at the end of the day, we're business partners. So like in that meeting, we're business partners, not married. Like I mean, we're married, but you get the point. And so ultimately he has his numbers he's got to hit. I got my numbers, and we're here to hold each other accountable. And what we realize being married and owners, and he's a COO, I run as the CEO, is that like there is going to be conflict. It is what it is. It's unavoidable. And anyone that's married that works together that says otherwise is probably lying. And so we said, why don't we give ourselves a structured format to argue this out? Like, because why don't we give ourselves a format to really like let it out in a way in which we agree that we can, and then walk out of the room with a handshake agreement that we can move past that meeting. So like, we're not allowed, we have to leave it at the door. And so that's allowed us to bring in like what we're frustrated about, or, anything like that, that's meant for that meeting. And so I would encourage really any partnership, to be honest with you, to have that type of level 10 meeting where you have a very structured outline of what you're going to cover. The meeting is meant to be holding each other accountable. And if there is any type of conflictive conversation, you want to do it in that meeting and not necessarily in front of other people. And so that's what we've been doing. And that's kind of how we've approached it. So whether it's right or wrong, it's worked.
I like that, level 10. I'm going to definitely make a note of that, mention to my wife later on after that. Let's talk a little bit about motivation, because it's very lonely at the top. It's very lonely, being the head of the company, whether that's a company of 1 or company of 100. You always find yourself just being in that very lonely space where you have to make the difficult decisions, where you have to hold yourself accountable. I mean, you guys have each other, but at the same time, you probably also find yourself in the situations where you're on your own at the end of the day, maybe with your own thoughts and whatever the case is. And one metric that I love using, not really a metric, but maybe a framework, is WWYRD. What would my replacement do? If somebody was to come in much more sophisticated, much smarter, much, more successful individual to come in and run the company the way I am, what would something that they do? And I try to think from that perspective, and also try to put myself, maybe a year ahead or 2 years ahead, and try to imagine that space and see if I fast forward and I'm in that particular time of, in that period of time, am I in the situation where I'm talking coulda, woulda, shoulda, or I'm actually, going through the check mark and saying, yes, I've achieved those particular objectives. I set myself, very high standards, and I've achieved that. So a lot of times I kind of do that self-analysis from that motivation standpoint. Talk to us a little bit further about how do you guys stay motivated, how you hold each other accountable from that motivation standpoint, and what's at the core of that kind of that personal drive to succeed, the personal drive to grow on ongoing basis, especially when you're not necessarily hitting those goals and things are not going your way or the way that you plan for it.
Yeah, I think that, we have a pretty big staff now, and we go through these stages. And I think anyone does that's growing a company, where Well, one, you're right. At the top, you start getting lonely and lonelier, which is why it's more important than ever to get in a room, whether it's local people, national, whether you're in a mastermind or you just throw it together and ask people to get on a Zoom. It's more important than ever to get in that group, because there are times where you're like, you feel defeated because you're like, man, can I not get this right? Is it just me? Like, I sometimes, especially with social media nowadays, you compare yourself to where somebody else you think is by watching them. And you're like, man, how is he already there? Like, why am I not there? And ultimately you get in a room with people and you're like, oh, wait, they also do have problems too. So like, you feel a little bit like you're not alone. And it's not about like, oh, they have problems too, but it just makes you feel more human. So it humanizes you a little bit, but the motivation changes over time. And, what I mean by that is, what used to motivate me in the beginning was money and all these other things. And then once you start making so much money, it's like, why do you need more money? It's about impact. And the other thing that motivates me the most at this point is my employees. Like, if I can provide a career path and grow them to where they want to be and they aspire to become, that for me is more impactful than making another dollar. And to be honest with you, I haven't changed how much I pay myself in probably 3 or 4 years, because it's not about that anymore. But as we grow the company, the biggest thing I think that I've seen along my peers and as I've grown, that's, it's the hardest part to stay motivated in, is every stage of growth requires two things here. Sometimes people say, I'm going to go sell the crap out of this and then fix my problems later, which sometimes that's how we get started. We have to go make the money and then we put the infrastructure in. Now I'm at a point where I'm like, I want the infrastructure and then I'll go sell the stuff, because I don't want to throw fuel on chaos. And so when we started this other company over here, the last couple of years, we started with the COO, the senior leaders, then the management, then the front line. And it's more because I was insane, like literally how much stress it takes when you don't start that way, but we all have to go through it to get somewhere. And then as we grow the company even more now, for example, we're about to double the revenue in one of our companies. And I'm like, you know what, guys, we're going to stabilize the team before we get there, because I don't want to get there and then be like, fuck, we're always reactive. And so we're stabilizing the team out, but that takes a whole nother level of, patience, because you're bringing on all these expenses, getting prepared to go make money over here, but you're not there yet. Mm-hmm. And so you have to take a few steps backwards per se. And I don't know if that's the right word, but to take 20 steps forward. And I think that part right there, as people grow their companies, that pushes the people that are out that can't handle it, because you have, like, at the end of the day, overhead keeps growing, but sometimes you got to take it on in order to get to where you're trying to go. You got to become the company that it takes to get to where you want it to go. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it's been the most motivating, and also the scariest part of being an owner is just like all those stages of growth and really putting yourself in a position to do it the right way each time.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, you got anything else?
No, I mean, so the only thing I would add around the impact component, and like Tiff said, at some point you reach this ceiling of, like, you get started in it because you want the money. And then once you get the money, it's like, okay, well, what's next? And the next thing is the impact. And one thing that I've seen over our years as entrepreneurs is that everyone who touches our organization, lives are changed in a positive manner. From the people who work with us, right? And the people on our team, from our vendors, from our private lenders, from our customers, our clients, like everyone's lives are better because of the touch that they've had with our organization. And that's very motivating. And that's a very, very strong purpose when you're talking about getting everyone behind a single purpose and a mission, and moving forward together in alignment.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you both talked a little bit about the kind of the core values. What's at the DNA of, just ourselves to begin with, and then how do we translate that into the culture that we're trying to build within the organization. And also, Tiffany, you briefly spoke about multiple projects that you guys have within the organizations, and almost seems like multiple companies within the company, which is an interesting space for me because of the whole concept of the focus. Because I also tend to catch myself in situations where I feel like I'm spreading myself too thin, or I'm moving in all kinds of different directions, where, I have to focus on maybe the venture capital for the technology side or the real estate. And now, the social media aspect is very new to me. And we had to hire the whole team to be able to essentially build that side of the organization. And it's resonates on so many levels, what you've talked about, where you feel like you have to take almost like three or five steps back in order to be able to accelerate and grow from that standpoint, which right now it definitely feels like, especially for us with the social media and the whole podcasting, all that being very new, but we understand where we're trying to go with that. So in terms of just the overall focus, and I'm more interested in just the dynamics between the relationship dynamics between you two. How do you hold each other accountable, more focused from a standpoint, and how do you draw that line where you're now operating as a husband and wife, maybe in your personal life, and when you are operating as a CEO and the COO within a professional setting, and essentially holding each other accountable and focused on, hey, maybe today you have a bad day and you don't want to take a day off, but essentially you got to take the reins and you have to lead the organization. Maybe share a little. I realize it's a loaded question, but I'm interested in the kind of the relationship aspect of the just essentially holding each other accountable to be able to grow the company and go to the heights that you guys setting out to.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've been doing, and not just between each other, but with everyone, is like, I'll give you an example. We just got out of our level 10 right before this podcast, and it was for our leadership team. And we're pivoting a bunch of stuff right now in Heels Homes. And I looked at Josh and he's like, I'll do it. And I looked at him and I was like, there's no physical way you can do this. Like, you've got to start empowering our people to become the leaders that they deserve to become. Mm-hmm. And they were sitting in the room, and I looked across the table and I said, you guys can do this, right? Right. Okay. Now, Josh, I'm going to hold you accountable. I need a deadline. When is this going to be trained by for them to handle? And ultimately, if we don't keep challenging each other to level other people up, we have to hold each other accountable to that. Because if not, then what we find ourselves doing is like, then we're working all the extra hours. We're taking time away from our family. Like, we're overworked. Like it's a yin and a yang, but I think that ultimately we really do have direct accountability with each other. And I think we've been doing this long enough now that, like, it stings a little bit in the moment because you're like, God, you're really holding me accountable to this. But I will say the marriage and the business thing is ever evolving. Like, if you ever meet a couple that has it down, let me know. I'd love to talk to them. But there's definitely we have weekly date nights, and ultimately we try really hard to separate them. And it was really hard for a while. And then the last year I've been working with like life coach, therapist, or whatever you want to call her, between Josh and I. And it's more about being proactive, because the more we keep growing, I mean, your mind goes in a million places of like, now I'm responsible for multiple lives. I just had a kid. I got all these things, right? And I think that doing that also helps. I think that if you're married and you're running a company and you're not proactive in having a third party talk to you, I think it's a must. Because even when something's starting to build up, then you have someone to talk to and work it out before it ever becomes a thing. And then one thing we recently started doing was, on our dates, our life coach, Lumilia, she sends us a list of 5 to 10 questions, and they're like, has nothing to do with work. And we are supposed to ask each other them on the date. But what it does is it takes us back into memories. Like, I'm just going to make this up, but hey, when was the first time that you remember I ever made you laugh? And then all of a sudden we start talking about our college days or this or that. And then we get completely taken off the work track. And I think that that's helped a lot. So we've been doing a lot of like little exercises that she's been giving us that completely keep us out of the work conversation and in our marriage conversation. So we've been working on that a lot.
That's been a huge help. The weekly date nights and getting our mind off of work. I mean, the reality is that we both love and are extremely passionate about what we do. And that's one reason why I think it works so well together is because we're so passionate about it and we actually love what we do. But as a result, when we go on dates, because we're passionate about it and because we love what we do, it naturally comes up in conversation all the time. So having a preset of questions and facilitating a conversation that's outside of that is very, very helpful.
That's super cool. And I appreciate you sharing that, because at the end of the day, it's very similarly, we do have weekly nights with date nights with my wife as well. And one of the things we always strive towards, these conversations is, let's not talk about kids, or let's not talk about work, because all of the conversations are all about the kids, especially these days. And having that third party as well, I've been working with kind of the therapist that the mental coach, fitness coach, so to say, and it's been life changing, because I always thought of that as an exercise that essentially weak people do, and I was just completely wrong from just overall personal growth standpoint. And it's been life-changing to be able to look at yourself from a completely different perspective, which I think resonates on what you guys are talking about. With a few minutes left, I want to focus a little bit more on just your personal dynamics on the day-to-day, whether in the office or maybe outside of that. With so much information overload and with social media and everything that's being thrown at us, I'm always fascinated with how people go about being very selective, what they let their minds be exposed to, essentially your content diet. Maybe talk a little bit further about what are the resources that you consume on a daily basis, and how do you keep yourself informed, educated, and maybe ahead of the curve, maybe ahead of your competition, to try to, not necessarily predict, but be a little bit more educated on what's coming and what to expect.
Yeah. We both have our routines, but I actually will say one thing I did this year. Last year, I'll fully admit, I got caught up in like comparing myself to all these people on social media. I got caught up in consuming myself through watching other people. And it wasn't healthy for me. So I actually this year unfollowed like every one of my peers. And I didn't do that because I don't like their content, but it was more of like, one, I need to be consumed in learning and spending time with my family. And if I have the follow button on someone who's popping out 10 reels a day like I am, then I'm going to get consumed in watching their content and comparing myself. So what I do now is I unfollowed them completely. Now all I follow is my own students, because they deserve me to be engaging on their stuff. And so when I go to create content, I do take time and I have a whole list of what I call my top 25 people that I think that we're more of peers in the industry. And then I look at the top 25 that are way above me, and I compare, and I do it intentionally. It's like research. Okay, what are they doing? How are they doing it? How are they editing? What are the topics? How are they being innovative? And and I'll be honest with you, I'm just at this point where I got caught up in wanting to be like the best editing, the best this, the best that. And I'm like, who gives a shit? Because at the end of the day, I work with experienced investors, not newbies. And experienced investors, they just want to give the content. They want to know the shit that actually makes them real money. And so I actually just recently made a post and put out content saying, guys, I'm guilty. For the last year, I've turned into everyone else. I've been doing the same damn reels, the same this, the same that, and following everyone else, and I'm done. You're just going to get the old Tiffany back, who turns on the camera and literally tells you what's working and what's not. And if you don't like the prettiness of it, I don't really give a shit. I said, press the unfollow button. And now I'm like, that's fine, because the people that are following me are the avatar that I want following me anyways. They're the people that I can make an impact on. They're the people I can lend money to. They're the people that I can invest in. Like, those are the people that I want following me anyways. So I'm done, chasing the hundreds of thousands of followers, and I want the right followers. And I think that's really helped me a lot. So that way I stay consumed in my staff, educating myself with real material and not consuming myself into stuff that's fluff. And I know Josh has a really good routine of when he listens to iBooks and stuff.
Yeah. So for me, I think there's a couple of components here. So how are we learning and adapting as things are changing? So for me, there's two things. It's I listen to an audiobook. At the very least, the standard is on my way into the office. Now, the goal is to listen to it to the office and from the office. So I have a 30-minute drive to and from. So if I catch an audiobook both ways, then it's an hour's worth of reading essentially. So that's how I learn new stuff. But Tiff and I also put ourselves in rooms, she talked about this earlier, rooms with other people who are operating at a high level. So we're learning from that aspect as well. Now on social media, you talked about information overload and staying focused. There's two views here. On social media, we're either a consumer or a creator. And our focus is not being a consumer, it's being a creator. Now, on the creator side of things, there's research and development that Tiff just talked about, where you're looking and seeing what's working for other people who might be in the same or similar industry. But then there's also the actual filming and creation of the content itself. So we've made a focus of being creators and not consumers on social media. And a big part of that was unfollowing a lot of friends and a lot of family to make sure that when we are on social, that we're only focused on the creator aspect.
Yeah. And we made a really strict schedule, or at least I did. We have an agreement in our marriage now where I have a 2-year-old now that he is the one that can work all the hours, but from 5 to 8 p.m., like my sole focus is on my daughter. And so literally when it turns 5 o'clock, like I've already worked 16-hour days for several years. So now is my time to be a mom. And ultimately, if something's on fire, I have confidence in the people that I put in the seats that they'll figure it out. And so I think everyone's in support and knows that I can work early, I can work late night, but like I have been really strict with my time with my daughter. And that's really what's kept me as a mother a little bit more sane since I'm a working mom. I travel a lot. I speak at all these places. And another thing that we've done is I've made it a priority this year that if I'm traveling, for the most part, they're coming with me. So we brought in a live-in nanny. We've delegated all of our house stuff. And so now that our nanny travels with us with our daughter, because I saw a stage there for about 6 to 12 months where like, I was like, it doesn't matter. None of this is worth it if I'm not present. Like it's just not worth it. And it's not that it's not that I'm not capable of doing all these things, but at what expense? And so as I started working with my life coach, I realized like, I did this so that I could be with my family, that I could be a mom, that I could do all these things. And so I'm really trying to figure out how I mold them together. Like, how do I keep my marriage strong while working together? How do I stay present with my daughter while still working? Cause I love it. So I'm going to bring her along in the journey. And it's not easy and I'm never perfect, but we've been working really hard on making this happen. And figuring it out as we go. So
that's super cool. And we probably could do another whole episode on the kids and the live-in nanny, because with 3 kids of my own and the nanny as well, I know how hard it is, and just a working mom situation. I think that's just super incredible, and there's a lot to unpack there. Guys, I can't thank you enough for your time today. It was just, initially I was thinking we're going to talk a lot about just real estate investment strategies or things that are going on in the market and all of that crazy stuff. And I love how the conversation just completely pivoted and shifted towards what I consider is actually at the core is very important. The things that are oftentimes overlooked, that not necessarily probably the sexiest part of, making the money, but at the end of the day, that's what pays the bill. That's what helps the companies go from 0 to 10.
Yeah.
awesome. I appreciate you having us on.
Absolutely. I mean, Tiff took the words right out of my mouth.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Take care.